Well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here. And M. Night Shyamalan is many things as a director, but one of the things he rarely is boring. His movies, the good, the bad, the ugly, always seem to have something kind of interesting to engage with and think about and kind of work through. His latest movie, Knock at the Cabin, just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So on the surface, Knock at the Cabin kind of has all the kind of elements that you would expect or kind of hope for from a good kind of classic Shyamalan psychological horror thriller. The story takes place in a very contained single location, which personally I'm just a sucker for. I love that kind of movie of sort of focusing the action in one spot and kind of focusing, dealing with the characters, not necessarily the global stakes of what's going on. Has a very kind of interesting high concept premise, which we'll get into, and it also just has the same kind of classic theme of faith versus disbelief and coincidence and skepticism and belief in the face of skepticism, which is sort of Shyamalan's dominant theme that he's explored in many of his different films, from Signs to Unbreakable, just sort of his pet concept. So I was intrigued. I'm not a big horror guy, but this did seem like an interesting story, kind of in the hands of, I think, one of Hollywood's most interesting and sort of spiritually minded directors. But unfortunately, kind of all those intriguing pieces just never quite seemed to come together into any kind of cohesive or satisfying whole picture. It has things to enjoy and appreciate in parts, kind of sporadically, but kind of the end result just sort of seemed like it missed the potential of what it could have been. So the premise of this movie, if you're not familiar, if you haven't seen the trailers, it begins with a family. It's a same-sex two male couple and their adoptive kind of Chinese daughter. They're vacationing at a cabin in the forest. All of a sudden, four kind of strange, mysterious figures led by the character played by Dave Bautista show up to the cabin, kind of interrupt their, they come knocking at the cabin and give kind of this shocking ultimatum that the family needs to willingly choose to sacrifice one of them in order to prevent the apocalypse from coming. They're not allowed to leave the cabin. And kind of for every no that they give them to that question, another plague is released kind of on the world. So again, that premise, there's a lot for Christians to dig into with that. Obviously, the very front and center kind of same-sex couple element to this, and also just sort of the implication of sort of this vindictive God that requires human sacrifice in order to prevent judgment on the whole world. So there is a lot of sort of content that I think maybe will keep Christians from diving in to this. But maybe on the other side, this film does explore a lot of spiritual themes, or at least it attempts to, kind of using this sort of high concept thing to dig into themes that I do think Christians can be interested in and kind of work through. So a lot of the tension, sort of if this movie works for you or if this movie doesn't work for you, kind of hinges on the movie keeping you guessing, kind of whether this shocking scenario is true or not. Kind of is sort of as this couple and their daughter, as they're sort of left to question, is this, are these strangers, are they just crazy religious fanatics? Is this whole thing kind of a setup to, are they being targeted because they're a gay couple and this is sort of, everything's this elaborate hoax? Or is what they're saying true? Is the apocalypse true? And kind of as the story progresses and, these seemingly plagues are coming on, and the evidence seems to be mounting, a lot of the tension comes from sort of what will these characters do? What will they decide to believe? And I enjoyed that aspect of this film. I enjoyed sort of the theme that it was going for. Unfortunately, though, that sort of spiritual theme often gets neglected because a lot of this movie seems to, Shyamalan shifts the focus kind of more specifically on these two men, on this couple, kind of through the use of kind of flashbacks and sort of showing their relationship and how it started and kind of how they got to where they are in the point of this story. And I get it from a narrative sense. I think it's trying to establish sort of the nature of the sacrifice they're being asked to make. I kind of sacrifice this relationship, so it's going to go deep and sort of show what led to the sacrifice. The problem is just that it kind of distracts from, I think, the more interesting themes and questions that are going on in the cabin, and it kind of, as a result of that, this film struggles to keep kind of any kind of sustained forward moving momentum. It just doesn't have sort of that sense of escalating stakes that I think it needs in order to work as a film. And often this sort of becomes somewhat repetitive, kind of repeating the same beats over and over. And at least for me, there just isn't enough compelling clues to get me invested in trying to decide, is this true? Is this a hoax? Is this craziness? The journey to get there just isn't a whole lot of fun. The film doesn't give you very much to go off of. And I kind of found myself kind of, as the film went on, more just sitting back and kind of waiting for it to just give me the answer. Is this true? Is this not true? Rather than kind of being motivated to really invest and try and kind of figure things out and just kind of read the evidence. So in that way, this film isn't quite as gripping as I think the premise of it should warrant. As far as content, the kind of things going on the surface of this film, language, there's heavy profanity in this. I didn't have an exact count, but I would say frequent uses of the F word, especially the more into this story it goes, kind of the more the stakes go up, the more the profanity goes up. So a lot of F-bombs in this movie, plenty of other sort of kind of, I guess, more minor profanities, as well as a couple of kind of crude words that characters say. And there's at least, I don't know, 3 to 5 kind of uses of Jesus or God's kind of name in vain or kind of abused. So there is heavy language in this. Again, this is an R-rated kind of horror movie. Sexuality, kind of the main thing. Obviously, this film centers very much on a same-sex couple, kind of Daddy Eric and Daddy Andrew, as their daughter refers to them, and they do feature a lot of sort of that relationship and the experience of these gay men, and through flashbacks, and you see sort of them having an awkward dinner with their kind of unaccepting parents, and you see them kind of experiencing like bigotry in the bar, and people treating them bad because of that, and kind of all throughout the film they sort of make the assumption that they're being targeted because they're a gay couple, despite the kind of the strangers trying to insist that they had no idea that that's not what it's about. And it is even kind of later implied that perhaps they were chosen because, as one character says, because their love is so pure. So this definitely does feature prominently sort of that same-sex relationship. So there's that. As far as violence goes, this is a movie with gruesome violence, although implied and kind of off-screen almost for all of it. And there's a couple kind of violent deaths of characters that get their head smashed in with a weapon or hacked up with a weapon, or one character that cuts his own throat. And in almost every, I think actually in every of those situations, like when the head gets smashed, the camera only goes from like the neck down, or when the throat's cut, it just sort of goes from the chest. So you see sort of the blood coming down, but it doesn't linger or show you, the carnage or the aftermath of the violence. Although with the exception of the throat cut, later it does sort of show the character, and you see the blood on the throat, but it's not necessarily a bloody or gory movie, but the implied violence is intentionally shocking and disturbing, so it still is a very violent film. And spirituality, we'll get more into this in just a second with the themes, because a lot of the main central themes are very spiritual focused, but there is sort of one other moment where the two future dads, I guess, are at an orphanage, and they're waiting to try and adopt the daughter, and there's sort of a mural that shows Jesus kind of playing soccer with a bunch of kids, and the one character kind of tells the other one, it's okay if you want to pray, I won't judge you for that. So you kind of get some sense of I guess, real kind of biblical God and stuff in there, at least in that moment. But again, most of the spirituality comes later in the themes. As far as kind of what's going on beneath the surface, the themes, this is going to be kind of depend on how you approach this as a Christian, whether you think there's interesting themes or whether you're sort of repelled and kind of put off by kind of the content and the themes. Because I would say kind of one of the main themes in this is sort of God and sacrifice and kind of the nature of salvation. Obviously, the worldview presented is very much not consistent with sort of what we would read in Scripture, and maybe that will turn people off. For me, I actually thought it was interesting it almost kind of shines a beautiful light on the Christian gospel by showcasing sort of the opposite or like the negative of that. Because kind of in the world of this film, sort of the implication, at least to the characters, what's presented by these strangers, is that there is sort of this ruling kind of deity that is sort of judgmental and vindictive, and sort of this sinful, evil, wicked world, that he's judging requires death. That death, sort of the punishment for sin. That you need sort of this sacrifice to appease the wrath of the God. So in some ways, the film is kind of consistent up until with the Christian gospel, up until it kind of gets to the solution that he says, hey, the world's sinful. The only way you can pay for sin is through death, through sacrifice. But kind of where they diverge from sort of the Christian understanding is in kind of how that is paid. In kind of in the movie Knock at the Cabin, it's people pay that price. This God just sort of needs to pick innocent people to pay the ultimate price on behalf of sort of the masses and kind of salvation, which I think just raises kind of shines an interesting light on just the Christian gospel of where we know that God paid that price himself through kind of sending Jesus on the cross. So in many ways, this movie is sort of depicting this like hellish world kind of absent from John 3:16 of God loving the world, where it is a very just God, but not a God that is loving. So I do think there's some interesting themes in that way. And kind of the other main theme, again, like I said earlier, sort of Shyamalan's pet theme that he always seems to return to, is this sort of that balance between faith and doubt, skepticism and evidence. Kind of at what point do coincidences become more than mere coincidences, and you actually have to kind of wrestle and accept that maybe there is something bigger, there is sort of a higher reality. And kind of the way that this film in particular wrestles with that is sort of this idea of kind of believing even when you don't want to believe, kind of overcoming your own desires and what you want, kind of control over the situation, to accept that maybe you don't have the answer, that there is sort of a bigger reality. There's an interesting conversation with one of these four strangers that's talking to one of the captives, and she kind of tells her backstory a bit of that she was raised as in a religious home, but quickly kind of fell away and just sort of thought church and religion was boring, and that it was all based on sort of outdated ancient books and practices, but that this sort of situation and these visions kind of reoriented her back to the fact that maybe there is sort of a spiritual reality. And she kind of repeats this mantra that she was told, I think, by her mother, which is trust in something more than you. And that kind of becomes, in some ways, this this underlying theme of the movie. And even the two kind of main kind of male characters, the captives in this, kind of approach this from different ways. One of them is more sort of sensitive to spiritual things. The other one is very much more of like a skeptic that just doesn't want to believe regardless of what the evidence is, where the other character more feels that there might be truth to this, but he's resisting because of sort of outside pressures. So there is a lot of interesting stuff with faith. Again, I'm always going to be interested when like a mainstream Hollywood film wrestles with spiritual themes, regardless of if I agree with like the conclusions or how they present it. I always think that that's interesting. So I do think there is some stuff in this film for Christians to appreciate, or at least to think through. So in the end, Knock at the Cabin, at least to me, just doesn't deliver on its potential. Obviously, as like a R-rated horror movie about a same-sex couple that needs to offer a human sacrifice to appease a vindictive, vengeful God, I think for many Christians this will be an easy movie to pass. Like I said, I am always going to be intrigued by films in Hollywood that does deal with spiritual sort of themes. Although with this film, I often just sort of found myself more intrigued by what the film could have been rather than actually enjoying and appreciating what the film ended up being. So again, I don't think this is a movie that a lot of people need to necessarily go see. Although if you do go see it, I do think there's some stuff in there that might make add a little value to the experience. But hey, let me know if you guys check this movie out. Again, there's not a whole lot of movies coming out in the next little bit. So if you just want to go to the theater and see a movie, if you do see this movie, let me know your thoughts. I'd love to have a conversation, especially on kind of what you think of some of the themes, sort of how that wrestles, the film wrestles with those, and maybe kind of from a Christian perspective, how we respond to that, how we engage with that. We'll love to have that conversation. If you guys haven't done so, encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. A lot of stuff going on here, live streams and movie reviews and other fun things that we have planned. We'd love to have you be a part of that. Most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to Collider through World for Christ.